Chapter 9. When they parted, Miss Mortimer gave Penelope precise directions for taking the bus so she wouldn't have to walk all the way back to number 12 Muffinshire Lane. Penelope had a great deal to think about along the way. There was the tart Felipe, a dessert so indescribably delicious that Penelope found herself literally unable to describe it. And this business about the children being in danger was perplexing, to say the least. But as Miss Mortimer had made clear, there was nothing for Penelope to do about it, but continue being the good, careful governess she had already proven herself to be. Which is how I intended to proceed in any case, she thought, peering above the sea of hats to see where they had stopped. Though I'm not sure I like Miss Mortimer's advice to not ask questions. After all, was it not Agatha Swanburne who said, "The more one asks, the more one knows, and the more one knows, the more one asks"? Then there was her reluctant, oh, how reluctant, promise about the hair poultice, just when her hair was starting to attract compliments, just when she'd met a person of the male variety who might be inclined to notice such things. But a promise was a promise. Perhaps she ought to buy herself a new hat while in London. There were certainly many styles to choose from, judging by the array of plumed and beribboned specimens she could see bobbing and nodding around her. Or perhaps the poultice could wait a short while to be applied, just until I returned to Ashton Place. The vehicle lurched its way around a corner so quickly the passengers swayed like trees in a storm. For, being a gentleman, Mr. Harley Dickinson is likely to offer to escort me to meet the old woman. It would only muddle things to alter my appearance now. After all, Miss Mortimer asked me to use the poultice. She didn't specify when. Much as the bus proceeded in an orderly fashion from one stop to the next, Penelope, too, thought about all these different topics in turn. Dessert, danger, hair, Simon. Sorting them out as best she could, and then moving on. When she'd finished her route, so to speak, her mind was free to wander. Penelope found herself dwelling yet again upon the subject of her mother and father. Although obviously far from perfect, clearly, the Lumleys were not the absolute worst parents in the world. That title surely belonged to the parents of the Incorrigibles, whoever they were. At least my parents had the sense to leave me in the care of a well-regarded educational institution, Penelope told herself, as she pictured her 3 pupils barking and gnawing and baying at the moon. My parents knew better than to abandon me in the woods to fend for myself, with only wild creatures as my companions. "Pardon me," she cried aloud suddenly. "Excuse me, driver, I believe we've reached my stop." As she left the bus at the corner of Muffinshire Lane, Penelope was startled by a familiar, yet enigmatic grunt. "Good day, miss." "Timothy," she exclaimed, for Penelope was not so rude as to address the strange, watchful coachman as old Timothy to his face. Then, without thinking, she blurted, "What are you doing here?" He snorted. "I just delivered Lord Frederick Ashton to the humble cottage he's paid a king's ransom to rent. I trust that meets with your approval, governess." "I apologize. I didn't mean to speak so abruptly." Penelope quickly composed herself. "It surprises me to see you here in London. You seem so much a part of Ashton Place. It's jarring to think of you in town." "People don't always stay where you put 'em, miss," he replied darkly. "As a governess, you ought to remember that." His tone made Penelope shiver. "What do you mean?" "Those children, for instance. You won't find them in the nursery where you left them, that's for sure." He turned and began walking back to the house with his quick, rolling gait. Penelope scurried after him. "Excuse me, what do you mean? The children are no longer in the nursery? I left them in Margaret's care, and I have only been gone an hour, or perhaps 2. Though even as she said it, Penelope realized it had been closer to 3 hours since she'd left the house. All that thought-provoking conversation and culinary brilliance of Chef Felipe, not to mention the long walk to the Piazza Hotel and the bumpy ride back, had eaten up a substantial portion of the day. "You've been gone 3 1/4 hours. Not that I've been keeping track." He looked straight ahead as they walked. "The children went on an excursion with Margaret and some young fellow I never saw before." Penelope's breath caught. "Do you mean Mr. Harley Dickinson? Tall but not too tall, with gentle waves of brown hair, finely formed features, and the gleam of genius in his eye," she said in a rush. "Yep, that's the one." Misery. Simon had come and she'd missed him, and now he was out for the day with Margaret and the Incorrigibles. A pang of some unfamiliar feeling poked at her insides. someplace not too distant from her heart. It was like a dull, throbbing ache or a sharp, twisty, stabby feeling. Oh, why were things becoming indescribable all of a sudden? By now, old Timothy had gotten 10 paces ahead of her. Once more, she ran after him. Please, one more question. Do you happen to know where they went? For she wouldn't be content until she could see with her own eyes that all 3 children were safe and sound, and preferably doing something educational. The coachman turned and looked at her with one eye half closed, the other so wide open as to look as if it had just seen a ghost. I believe they were going to the zoo. The zoo? But that is the very last place they ought to go, Penelope cried. What's the trouble, miss? Most tykes love the zoo. Why should these 3 be any different? Did Penelope imagine it, or was old Timothy suppressing an evil chuckle? Now I have a tasty errand to run. Here's my shop. Enjoy your day. And with that, he ducked into the nearest doorway, which Penelope saw was the entrance to a small shop called the Charming Little Bakery. Under different circumstances, and if she were not still feeling so spectacularly well fed, Penelope would have been interested in sampling the wares of this promising-sounding establishment. But her mind was fixed on the Incorrigibles. The zoo, dear me, they could hardly have picked a worse place to go. I must find them at once, she resolved. But how exactly did one get to the zoo? The answer came in a flash. Miss Mortimer is proven right again. Having a guidebook is essential when visiting a strange city. I will dash up to the nursery and fetch my Hicksby's. Surely it will contain directions to such a popular destination. With that, she lifted her skirt and broke into a run, and didn't stop until she reached number 12 Muffinshire Lane. The science-minded among you will no doubt recall Newton's first law of motion, which, among other things, predicts that a distraught governess traveling at high speeds over a slippery surface will continue to do so until some greater force conspires to stop her. Miss Clark had been right to scold Margaret. The wooden floors of the foyer had been polished to such a high degree of slickness that Penelope's feet flew out from beneath her the moment she burst through the door. Ah! She cried, as most people would under the circumstances. Arms flailing, Penelope skidded down the hall on what the French would politely call her derriere, past the stairs and straight into the drawing-room, where Newton's greater force lay ready and waiting, an overstuffed armchair containing the seated form of Sir Frederick Ashton, the unimaginably wealthy and incurably near-sighted master of Ashton Place. Penelope slid almost completely beneath the chair before she finally came to a stop. Only her feet poked out from the back. Lord Ashton seemed oblivious to her arrival. Constance, can't you be more understanding? I've business to attend to. Men's business. And the club's accommodations are far more suitable for that sort of thing than this ridiculous frou-frou of a house. What? But you've only just arrived. Really, Frederick, it's been unbearably dull here. I've not set foot out of the house, and I have no callers, not one, and there's no one to talk to except the servants. You mustn't talk to the servants, dear, unless you're ordering them about. It undermines your authority. What do you expect me to do all day, then? Shop? If you like, but don't spend too much. But I thought the whole point of being rich was that nothing was too much. Thud. Ow! Penelope yelled involuntarily, for she bumped her head on the bottom of the chair in an attempt to crawl out from underneath. Did you hear something? Lord Ashton looked behind him and on both sides of the chair. Anybody back there? Stop or I'll shoot. Unlike her husband, Lady Constance had eyesight enough to tell whether or not a set of human limbs were sticking out from beneath the furniture. She marched around the chair and planted both hands on her hips. And whose plain and sensible shoes are these? She demanded. The rest of you come out at once. Meekly, Penelope pushed herself into view. Pardon me, she said, clambering to her feet with as much dignity as she could muster, given the awkward circumstances. Lord Ashton squinted in Penelope's direction. See, there was someone there. Is it a burglar? No, wait, you're the governess, what? Yes, Lord Ashton, I was on my way upstairs to the nursery, and I, slipped. I apologize for the intrusion. She curtsied and started backing towards the door. Not so fast, Miss Lumley. Lady Constance had the look of a gathering storm. Did you know the post has been delivered twice already today? Why, yes, I imagine it has been. Penelope was unsure where this conversation might be headed, but she hoped it would be brief. The thought of the incorrigible children at the zoo was still foremost in her mind, and she was determined to grab the Hicksby's guide and rescue them as soon as possible. "Have you checked the mail tray by any chance?" "No, my lady," Penelope swallowed. "I have been out." "I see." Lady Constance's voice was dangerously controlled. "If you can spare a moment from your busy social calendar to examine its contents, you will discover it contains yet another envelope addressed to you. Your letter has been lying there, taunting me all day." "I'm sorry, Lady Constance. I didn't intend—" Lady Constance made a dramatic gesture to silence poor Penelope. "As if yesterday's impertinence were not enough. Once again, Miss Lumley, it seems you are in receipt of mail."
"Mail? Zounds, I almost forgot." Lord Frederick jumped to his feet and began patting his pocket. "Constance, dear, I have an invitation for you somewhere. Baron Hoover handed it to me at the club. It's from his wife. Where did I put it? Maybe it will take your mind off spending my money for an afternoon, what? I can find the blasted thing, that is."
Lady Constance's mood changed on the instant. "An invitation? Really, oh, Frederick, that's the best news I've had since arriving at London. Hooray, hooray!"
Wait, here it is."
From his vest pocket, he removed a small envelope of heavy, cream-colored stalk.
"Let that keep you busy for a while, eh? See you later, dear. Don't wait up."
He gave her an indifferent peck on the cheek and strode out of the room. Penelope, too, thought that she might take a chance to leave. "Good day, ma'am," she murmured. She was nearly to the door when Lady Constance squealed and seized her by the arm. "Oh, look! Do you see this envelope, Miss Lumley? This is from the Piazza Hotel, simply the most exclusive hotel in London, home of the Fern Court and the legendary Chef Felipe. I wouldn't expect someone of your social station would have heard of him, but trust me, he has no peer when it comes to the use of a whisk. They say he makes a positively undescribable dessert." "Tart Felipe," offered Penelope to move things along. Just imagining what might be going on in the zoo at this very moment was more than she could stand. All those grim-faced bears, hungry lions, wild-eyed baboons. "I beg your pardon." Lady Constance looked stunned. "Tart Felipe, the indescribable dessert." Penelope stopped, for it occurred to her that it might be wise to downplay her first-hand knowledge of this tasty treat. "That's only a wild guess, of course, given that this chef's name is Felipe," she said, smiling and shrugging as if to say, "These crumbs on my skirt and the tiny fruit stains on my sleeve have nothing whatsoever to do with the actual tart Felipe that I greedily devoured not 2 hours ago." Lady Constance gave Penelope a suspicious look, but said only, "You are correct, Miss Lumley. Tart Felipe is exactly what it's called. A lucky guess on your part, I suppose." She resumed her excited babble as she tore open the invitation. "Anyway, they say that tart Felipe is so extraordinarily delicious that words simply fail." Her voice trailed off as she stared at the note. Her round eyes grew rounder. Her pink pursed lips went slack. Then, "What?" she yelled. "Is this some kind of a joke?" Lady Constance held the card between 2 fingertips as if it were a slimy object. "This is not an invitation to dine at the Piazza Hotel. This is an invitation to accompany Baroness Hoover, not one of my favorites, by the way, on an excursion to the vilest, ugliest, dirtiest part of London. According to the Baroness, tomorrow we are going to visit the poor." Lady Constance spit out the word poor as if it were the seed of a rotten grape. "She claims such missions of mercy are all the rage among society ladies, and if I wish to fit in, I must go along." Distraught, Lady Constance threw herself into Penelope's open arms. "What a nightmare! With all the exquisite restaurants and dress shops in London, I am to spend my days performing acts of charity in a totally unfashionable and bad-smelling neighborhood. Oh, you have no idea how fortunate you are, Miss Lumley. For a person of your station would never think to aspire to luxuries such as dining at the Fern Court, and thus you don't have to endure the bitter disappointment when your hopes are dashed to bits. It is an agony you are spared. Lucky you." Penelope patted her mistress awkwardly on the back. "Perhaps the tart Felipe is not all it's cracked up to be," she nearly said, for she did feel sorry for poor Lady Constance and wished to comfort her. But that would be dishonest, so instead she said, "Perhaps visiting the poor will not be as smelly as all that." This was a statement she could stand behind. After all, Penelope herself was once a poor, bright female, just like all the other girls at Swanburn, and she was quite sure she had never smelled of anything but plain soap and the occasional splash of lavender water.
Don't be absurd! I can think of nothing more horrible. I suppose it's better than sitting at home with nothing to do.
Lady Constance righted herself, as if her teary-eyed dive into the bewildered governess had never happened. She sniffed and looked around the room.
Where are the bell pulls in this house? Margaret!
Then she turned to Penelope.
Find Margaret and send her to my dressing room at once. I must choose clothes for tomorrow, something that makes me look generous.
Margaret's not here, milady, Penelope replied unthinkingly. She's at the zoo with the children.
The zoo?
Lady Constance's lip began to tremble at once.
Where is the justice in this world, I ask you? Governesses receiving mail, ladies' maids taking trips to the zoo, while I, Lady Constance Ashton, will be forced to trudge through muck and mire and poor people.
Then the waterworks began in earnest. The wailing was so loud that Penelope had to fight the urge not to cover her ears. Luckily, the din attracted the notice of the staff, who came rushing to the rescue, and in the hubbub, Penelope was finally able to run up to the nursery. By the time she returned with her Hicksby's guide, Lady Constance was surrounded by a dozen servants, who fanned her and waved smelling salts under her nose, and offered tiny glasses of schnapps to revive her spirits. Even Dr. Westminster would have a hard time taming such a wild creature as Lady Constance, Penelope thought as she watched the scene unfold. But speaking of wild creatures, to the zoo.